Hello, folks, lads and lassies. I'm going to say something which is maybe surprising for people who have already realised what a loony lefty I am. But recently I've been watching the videos and reading the books of various people who are considered to be on the right. And I mean people like Douglas Murray and Peter Hitchens and Neil Ferguson and even Jordan Peterson. Now, first of all, the reason I wanted to check these people out was the old idea of know your enemy. If I'm going to be critical of people on the right or the left or any position, I should at least know what they're actually saying. And it's amazing how many people don't know what their enemies are actually saying. They just fill in some kind of cliched idea and never actually check out what the other side is saying. So in an effort to check out what the other side is saying, I've been watching various the clips on that YouTube that you have nowadays, and reading some of their books and reading some of their articles, etc. Now, I want to focus on Douglas Murray. Now, I have to say that having watched some of his YouTube clips, I haven't read any of his books yet, but I intend to. Having watched several of his things, I'm quite impressed by him because he's obviously very intelligent. He's obviously very genuine. Maybe I just like him because he has a very Scottish name, Douglas Murray. That sounds like a real Scot, although, of course, he sounds very posh Southern English. But anyway, now, I have to say that even as a leftist myself, I am pretty impressed with Douglas Murray. I'm sure he'll be over the moon to hear that. However, there's various things about him which strike me as very, very poor, very poor. And for surprising and somewhat baffling ways. Now, here is an interview with him on the Politics Joe show, or whatever Politics Joe is. Actually, I'm not sure what it is, but it's very good. There's a lot of good stuff on it. And let's listen to what Douglas has to say, because this is an example of the things he says which I disagree with, even though there are quite a lot of things he says that I do agree with.
It's one of the interesting things about conservatism is that everyone's always conserving different things in different countries. The left has a certain advantage in this regard, which is the left always demands exactly the same things in lockstep everywhere, always at the same time. And that has a virtue.
Now, that's just one example of the kind of things that he says in his interviews and in his videos quite a lot, which is a ridiculous exaggeration of what left-wing views actually are. What he seemed to be saying there, unless I've misunderstood him, is that left-wing groups always want to do the same thing and everybody has to do the same thing, and it's a unified and kind of totalitarian bloc. Now, this baffles me because it's clearly not the case. If that was the case, the left wing was always the same. No, everybody had to do the same every time. Why were the Labour Party arguing with each other so much about Jeremy Corbyn? They fell out with each other very, very considerably, the Labour Party. The Labour Party basically, according to a certain point of view, sunk Jeremy Corbyn's chances of winning the 2017 election, which the Labour Party lost by only 2.3%. Very, very close. They sunk it themselves with internal disagreements amongst the left. If we look at George Orwell, one of my books is about George Orwell's childhood experiences in the southeast of England. And in his later adult life, he, as a democratic socialist, was strongly at odds with the authoritarian Stalinists of his time. or I myself, as a maverick leftist now, even saying that I find something interesting and appealing about Douglas Murray. There'll be various authoritarian leftists who find that it is a terrible thing to say. All these are examples of the fact that left is a very broad church. And rather than being some block of everybody doing the same and everybody having to do the same thing, march and step, as Douglas said, one of the key things about the left is they're always falling out with each other too much, and there's too much divide. There's always disagreements within the left, and there always has been. So this idea, unless I very much misunderstood it, that the left is a kind of unified bloc and everybody has to march in the same way, is just not the case. And I've heard Douglas Murray, dear old Dougie Murray, say many, many times things which are not what the left is. And it does confuse me because he's clearly an intelligent guy, clearly speaking in a genuine way. So why does he exaggerate and distort what left-wing ideas are in such a horrendous way so often? It genuinely confuses me. Anyway, going on to the next point, he talks about an element of history, if I can find it. And let's listen to that.
Here's one of the things. People in recent months have been saying, we don't teach enough about X event. We don't teach enough about anything. I was speaking to a friend's child recently who described the fact that they had done the French Revolution in one lesson. I've spoken to friends in America, I've spoken to friends in Britain, have no idea what happened at the French Revolution. By the way, it's quite a useful thing to know about these days. That one of the reasons why some of us were very concerned about the pulling down of statues was not just because it wasn't, as one fatuous Guardian writer claimed of me, that I was sort of in support. If you're against the pulling down of a statue of a slave owner, you must be pro-slavery. It's like, give me a break. How can you be so dim? How can you try to reduce these things to that extent? It wasn't because of that. It's because we know from history that you start by attacking and pulling down statues by mob diktat, and next you go for people, as they have been doing in Portland, Oregon. So, yes, it's worth knowing about history, but nobody is being taught about history. Most people know nothing about history. If we walked around this city at the moment and asked people the most basic questions about history, they wouldn't know them. And that's not an insult to the people of London. It's the case everywhere.
Now, I'm going to agree with him there. There is a terrible lack of knowledge about history and sociology and politics and most things, really, but certain aspects where we are not really expected to know. We're not expected to know how to conduct brain surgery ourselves, but we should, generally speaking, as informed people, know about history and politics and elements of society and various elements of things which affect us and which we are ourselves plugging into. And it's quite right that people have a very, very low knowledge of history. But whose fault is that? Here's a key point. Now, presumably, Douglas will think that it's largely the result of left-wing policies. I presume, again, well, in this case, I'm not presuming on that Douglas's part, he may not think that. But on the part of various right-wing people and capitalist supporters who criticize young leftists, they very often say, oh, they only support communism because they don't know any history. They don't know how terrible communism is. Now, the thing is, putting aside the idea that, as far as I'm concerned, Stalin, Mao were not actually communists, they just called themselves communists. Putting aside that extremely large point, which I'll go into in another video, we can ask, who has led to the state where young people don't know about history? And there's a very good case to be made for saying, you conservatives have caused that. You Republicans have caused that. You capitalists have caused that. Why? Because you've defunded, not the police, you've defunded humanities departments. You've reduced funding for social sciences courses. You've closed libraries. You have, as is happening now in the USA in many states, banned books. Not only that, but it's capitalist companies that have made people so tired by overwork that when they get home, they're too tired to read a book. It is big right-wing companies who fill the airways with mindless, stupid entertainment, which take people away from the idea that we should be educated, that we should, as Douglas goes on to say, that we should educate ourselves. It's the right wing and conservatives and capitalists that have taken us away from that older vision, which was in the 19th century largely a working class left wing vision of educating yourself. Also, it's right wing conservative governments that put students into such debt that they have been moved away from focus on genuine learning towards what will actually get them a job to pay off that debt, etc., etc. So, right wingers, if you're asking why do so many young people not know history, look to your own policies. Right. Third thing. Again, there's many, many intelligent, interesting things which Dougie Murray says in this interview, and the basic idea that we don't know history is correct. And he's correct about several other points too, including that some of the things which Guardian writers note is often a load of rubbish. I would agree with that too. Last point, no. He talks about the USA.
That they would like the Constitution to be rewritten. And if I think all of the I don't like to be alarmist, but all of the conditions are in place in America for effectively civil war, because there is a total divide over what the country is. Half of the country thinks, let's say half, it's not half and half, but a significant portion of the country thinks that America basically has nothing going for it. It would have been better if Columbus had never sailed out. It would have been better if the founding fathers had never been born. The whole thing's been a disaster. And another portion of the country believe, I think rightly, that America has had its problems, but that broadly speaking it's been a force for good in the world. But these are becoming irreconcilable positions.
Now, that is indeed a scary situation. Now, he said this 2 years ago, before the Biden-Trump election was finally settled. But he, in mapping out these two aspects, he's talking about the left wing and the right wing position here. Again, he exaggerates the left wing position into something quite ridiculous. And he doesn't mention what we might call the third position, which is people who basically believe in American democracy, who like American democracy, but think it has been distorted and abused by elements of the right in America and elements of capitalism in America, distorted and abused into an undemocratic plutocracy. And the people who mostly are leftists or centrists wish to bring back America to its democratic roots, you might say, and push forward America to becoming more genuinely democratic. Now, he doesn't mention that. Why not? As I say, I come back to my first point again. Very intelligent and genuine, though Dougie Murray, as I'm calling him now, clearly is. And I like him, and I intend to watch more of his videos, and I intend to read a couple of his books. But he does distort the position of the left, often in quite ridiculous ways. And I wish he didn't. Thanks very much, folks. Please check subscribe on this or on the like button. I've just started this channel a couple of weeks ago, so things are just getting started here. But I intend to post a whole bunch of stuff here. Cheers.